friends, we are joining you today because the new World Press Freedom Index is out. And guess what? India is ranked 161 out of 180 countries in the new index, trailing countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Somalia. To discuss this report and to find out what India can do to be better than Afghanistan in press freedom, we have with us Dr. Salvatore Babones, who needs no introduction. And we also have editor of the Australia Today, Jay Bharadwaj. Welcome, Dr. Salvatore.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start with the index. What do you make of the rankings that have just come out?
It's easy to make fun of them, and many of us have done so. I've done so myself on Twitter. The international comparisons are, it's easy to laugh at the international comparisons. I don't want to make light of it. Press freedom is an important issue. Certainly, journalists in danger is an important issue. But when India is ranked 161st in the world, alongside Afghanistan at 152nd, doing much better, and Hong Kong doing substantially better than India, that, of course, raises concerns about the integrity of the index. Now, again, I always encourage people to go into the numbers and to go into the details. So when you go into these sub-indices, the contrast gets even more striking. So, for example, specifically the political situation, the political indicators for freedom of press in India stand at, on a scale from 0 to 100, a 33 for India on the RSF Press Freedom Index. Now, that's 33 out of 100. Afghanistan is at 48. Hong Kong is again at 40. So the idea that whatever we think of press freedom, and maybe there are problems, it's hard to tell. The idea that the political environment in Afghanistan is substantially better, not just a little bit better, but substantially better than the political situation in India. The idea that the political situation in Hong Kong is substantially better is just a non-starter. I mean, if I read the RSF's own text about Hong Kong, a former British colony, has a vibrant media environment. All right, fair enough. However, since the handover to China, most media have fallen under the control of government or pro-China groups. In 2021, two major independent news outlets, Apple Daily and Stand News, were forcefully shut down. More than 5 other independent media outlets chose to shut down, citing risk concerns, while diasporic media outlets are being established around the world. Well, the idea that this political environment, that the critical news media are being forcibly shut down while only pro-China media are allowed to operate. The idea that that political environment is substantially better than India's is just incomprehensible. I mean, again, we all know about Afghanistan. It's easy to laugh at, but I want to read you RSF's own description of the media situation in Afghanistan. The fall of Kabul to the Taliban radically changed the media landscape. In the space of 3 months, 43% of Afghan media outlets disappeared. Of 10,780 people working in Afghan newsrooms at the beginning of August, only 4,360 were still working in December, or 4 out of 10 journalists. Proportionally, women have been much more affected. More than 4 out of 5, 84% of women journalists have lost their jobs since the arrival of the Taliban. Again, let's leave aside the overall rankings because rankings are malleable. Those situations don't seem to be substantially better than the political environment in India, no matter what side of Indian politics you're on. I mean, even if you're critical of the current government, I don't think anybody, any reasonable person in India would say that, well, those descriptions are bad, but India is far worse.
Dr. Salvatore, that was my follow-on question, that these kind of rankings, they raise serious questions about the credibility of the rankings themselves. I mean, if you look at a country like India, I mean, it has got a really vibrant and probably one of the most, if not the most, linguistically diverse media spaces in the world. Thousands of newspapers, TV channels in so many languages. I mean, whatever your view of the current dispensation may be, or of India, maybe generally speaking, but isn't it getting to a point where it's absolutely outrageous, where it's getting very difficult to really think that no, there is no malicious intent, that it's probably only a problem of methodology? Do you think it's getting to that stage?
Well, I am infamous for having told Indians that it's India's own intellectuals who are anti-India in these rankings, and I'll stand by that here. These text summaries are written by Reporters Sans Frontières. That is, at their own office, they're trying to make sense of what they're seeing in the survey results that are coming in. The surveys, however, are answered by journalists in the country being affected, which means that it's Afghan journalists who are actually telling Reporters Sans Frontières that the political situation is about a 40, 43. And it's Indian journalists who are answering the same set of questions, literally the same questionnaire, who are ranking or rating, not ranking, rating their country on average lower than Afghan journalists are rating Afghanistan. Now, that might be because the only Afghan journalists left are those who are approved by the Taliban. I can't say. It may be because the only Hong Kong journalists left are those who are approved by the Chinese government. But in any case, I don't know who's in the survey. But I do know that the survey primarily is answered by in-country journalists. They're the ones who are providing the quantitative ratings that then get compiled into this ranking. RSF simply puts a text on top of it to try to make sense of it. But the numbers are coming from Indians themselves.
Jay, I would like to get you in here because, as Professor Salvatore just mentioned, that it is the numbers are coming from Indian journalists themselves. But at the end of the day, this is again not a quantitative data in terms of numbers. It's the numbers are also based on some journalists' opinions because they are providing the information. But what do you make of this? Because whatever the situation may be, better or worse than before, the same as before, isn't it kind of, as I said, beyond laughable if you're putting India behind countries like Afghanistan or Pakistan, where, say, something like blasphemy can carry a death penalty? I mean, you are talking about countries like that, and you're putting India behind those countries in terms of press freedom index. So, isn't it a bit strange, to say the least?
Pallavi, see, I will borrow something which Professor Salvatore have just said, that it's not the institution which is biased against India or something. See, there is a formula for a square plus b square. It will be the same whatever number you feed there. A plus b whole square is always is equal to the same thing. Be a 10 or 50 or 5 million or 10 million. So the formula will remain the same. So what borders this institution does it? There is a formula. There is weightage for everything. They have picked up Indian reporters. I'm also a member of the institution, so I can tell you this. I'm not allowed to be one of the person to respond to those questions because I'm not residing in India. There is the limitation that you have to be more than 6 months plus 6 months 1 day in that country to respond for that place. So I could not respond for India, even though I know much better than what most people have responded to. So they have a system in place. So imagine an Afghan journalists who are probably in exile. There are some journalists who are in exile have talked about press freedom in Afghanistan, and they have said, yes, we are able to do the XYZ, we are not able to do XYZ. Imagine the Indian journalists who have responded to the questionnaire have given it the worst of the worst response just because of their political leaning or political ideology, or maybe they are not political, maybe just because of the hatred towards the current dispensation which is there in India right now. Because of that, they have responded in certain way, and the result comes to whatever it is. If right now we are three people in this panel, if there is something, you are the host, so you will get 4 points, and me and Professor Salvatore gets 3 each. If I give 3 from my 3, I give 0 out of 3 or zero point 0.2 out of 3, and Professor Salvatore also gives 0.2 out of 3, then it's out of 6 is only 0.8 or something. So this is the situation. It's not, the institution is not biased because there is a system. They have to address. I am writing to them about the process. They don't reveal the whole thing. They will keep the confidentiality of the process. However, they will tell that we have not manipulated the game. They are not rigging the game. It's the respondents who are doing it. Now, one of the most important thing, how do we pick the respondents? This is the game where everything works. You, me, Professor Salvatore, all fit in the puzzle when we know the game of picking the respondents. Who are those? How they are picked is anybody's guess. So first we have to have a democratic system. How it is picked? Is it Press Council of India? Is it Press Club of India? Different states have any representation, or any other body has representation in there, which is not clear unless there is a democratic system for the representation. All these results have no meaning, in my opinion. Pallavi?
Now, Professor Salvatore, I would like to bring you back here that as Jay mentioned that there is a formula, a plus b whole square, it will always be a square plus 2ab plus b square. But the point is there is also something called as common sense, in the sense that because we are not dealing with, absolute numbers here, we are dealing with opinions. So yes, I mean, even if you're getting responses like that, there are things that are visible to the naked eye, or there are things that like there are blasphemy laws in countries where they carry a death penalty,
Sure.
or apostasy laws in several countries. So the point is to rank India behind those countries, and everybody knows what's happening in Afghanistan. It's not something that's ambiguous, that in China, okay, there is this much freedom or there isn't this much freedom, or Russia, I mean, there are countries which are doing really badly. There's civil war going on in certain countries, and you rank India behind them. So I mean, the bottom line then is, what's the point of having these kind of indexes if they're not going to give a credible picture of the world?
Look, the indexes serve the interests of those who are producing them. So the people producing this index is Reporters Without Borders, and they want to essentially generate interest in funding for the kinds of causes that they're associated with. And from that perspective, this ranking is successful, right? It does generate interest and concern, which then can go into their fundraising efforts for both Reporters Without Borders and for allied organizations like Committee to Protect Journalists. But part of the problem here is that as Jay said, first of all, we don't know who's answering the survey. But second, you yourself, Pallavi, mentioned questions like, is there the death penalty for blasphemy? Well, that's not one of the questions, right? And in a way, India actually suffers on these indices precisely because it's a democracy, precisely because people who are critical of the government can be journalists in India. As a result, people who are critical of the government are answering the survey. In Hong Kong, if you're critical of the government, you can't be a journalist in Hong Kong. I mean, it's that simple. You're not going to be allowed to practice journalism. So the pool itself is affected. Non-democratic countries themselves generate their own pool of people who are answering the surveys. Now, I don't know the details of how Reporters Sans Frontières handles these situations, because it does rank, for instance, China is ranked last, as it should be. China absolutely does not have a free press. Who they're getting to answer the China survey, when clearly you can't have Xinhua journalists answering the China survey, I don't know. They don't publish details on this. It's a relatively opaque organization. They do publish their questionnaire, and people might be interested to hear some of the items in the questionnaire, because what goes in those text summaries is not what's being asked, that's what's actually contributing to the score. So, for example, I mentioned the political context variable, the one subcomponent on which India does especially badly compared to Afghanistan. Now, we all know that Afghanistan has a much worse political context for the media than India. I mean, no matter what side of politics you're on, everybody agrees with that. But the questions are, well, first, what influence does the government have on the editorial board of media? No influence at all is the best, and a very strong influence is the worst. Well, the Afghan government may not actually, Afghan media may not have editorial boards. The government may not be actually interfering. I don't know. Is the broadcast licensing process transparent? What degree of autonomy from political authorities do the heads of the public broadcaster have? Do government officials and other politicians act in a way that it guarantees press freedom? Do news media outlets with the largest audiences provide news coverage that is independent of the government? Do public media outlets ever ignore sensitive information regarding the government? Now, both India and Afghanistan are being rated, well, Afghanistan is being rated medium on here, when medium would correspond to an answer of no opinion, right? So it may just be that people in Afghanistan are saying, I have no opinion on this, I have no opinion on this, I have no opinion on this. And if they are answering, I have no opinion on any of these, well, Afghanistan gets a 50. That is right in the middle between 0 and 100. And in fact, Afghanistan's score on the political subindex is 48. I think if I have to, I'm sorry, I'm now old and I can't necessarily read very well without my glasses. Yes, 48.9. So Afghanistan's score on the political subindex is essentially 50-50. It's 49. So it might just be that in Afghanistan, because of the design of the survey, people in Afghanistan are writing, don't know, can't answer, can't answer. Oh, Afghanistan gets not a perfect score, but a medium score. In India, they're saying, oh, government is interfering. And so India is down at a 33 to Afghanistan's 49. It's bizarre how these things work. It is, I guess, an auditing issue. And I've raised this before with other indices, that the bias is not there in the people constructing the index. That is, they didn't construct this index with an idea, how can we construct an index that would penalize India? However, there's maybe an implicit bias in that, by asking questions in a certain way, they're not capturing the essence of it, which is there actually a free press? Like that question, that's not on the questionnaire. Right? Is there actually a free press is not one of the questions you ask on the Press Freedom Index questionnaire. And that produces these odd results.
Yeah, and as Jay mentioned, that the issue is also of how you are choosing your respondents. So while there may not be a bias in the methodology, but there could be a bias in terms of the people you are picking to respond to these questions. And as you had indicated, Dr. Salvatore, in your democratic index, that that North Korea was given a perfect score on universal suffrage. Now the thing is, that's why, and the reason why we are having this discussion is because these indexes carry some weight. They're not just just for academic purposes. I mean, these indexes are read by people around the world, and that's why this becomes a problem.
Look, it is a problem, but I want to highlight one issue that is particularly germane because it's repeatedly used against India, and that is the safety of journalists. Now, we all know that journalists are much less safe in Afghanistan than in India, right? Hands down. If you're a journalist and you're being put in an assignment, if you go to India from the United States, you might get dangerous situations, this sort of thing, which you'll ignore because you're a journalist and you want to go report from Manipur where the action is. You don't want to sit in Delhi where everything is quiet. Of course, if you go to Afghanistan, you have to have a private security contractor. And CNN or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal won't even send someone to Afghanistan without an entire security team in place. Yet, according to RSF, security is better in Afghanistan than in India for journalists. It's still bad in Afghanistan, but better than in India. Now, how can you get there? Right? Well, if you look at the safety questions on the indicator, it's a series of questions, and I'm going to read them because they're so straightforward. Have any journalists been assaulted in the past 12 months? India is a country of 1.4 billion people. Somewhere in India, a journalist has been assaulted in the last 12 months. I guarantee it. Have any journalists been tortured or suffered cruel and degrading treatment in the past 12 months? Well, torture in India, no. Degrading treatment? I bet my own guru, Rajiv Sardesai, believes that he has suffered degrading treatment. Okay, so there you go. Have any journalists been murdered? Yes, there have been. I mean, let's face facts. There have been murders of journalists in India. Have any journalists been arbitrarily detained? Well, arbitrary is in the eye of the beholder. In Kashmir, there have been cases of people claiming that journalists are arbitrarily detained when, in fact, they're being accused of participation in terrorist activities. Have any journalists been kidnapped? Okay, I don't know about that. Is there an emotional risk for journalists linked to their job? Are journalists morally harassed in their workplace? Are journalists at risk of having their facilities seized or damaged? And are journalists at risk of having their social media accounts blocked? Okay, well, these are all things maybe we don't like. But in a country the size of India, something like this is going to happen somewhere in India that a journalist can honestly say, check the box, check the box, check the box. And so the RSF write-up for India highlights deaths of journalists. So it makes a big point of this in its write-up that journalists are not safe in India. I'm going to try to pull out the I'm going to see if I can pull up the actual text from it. Safety. With an average of 3 or 4 journalists killed in connection with their work every year, India is one of the world's most dangerous countries for the media. Journalists are exposed to all kinds of physical violence, and then it goes on and lists all the things that journalists have supposedly suffered. Well, I've done up the numbers. That is, I've gone to the actual data from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I've given you a chart for that. Yeah, I've gone to the actual data for the Committee to Protect Journalists to look for the last 10 years. What has been the rate of journalists being killed in the course of their work in India? In fact,
Dr. Salvatore, we'll just put up the graph for a few seconds, and then we'll talk about this issue. We are just putting up the graph. Just give us a few seconds.
Sure. Okay, so journalist deaths per billion. Our journalist deaths in India are 2.3 per billion per year. That's lower than in the United States. Now, it's far lower than the rest of the world. In fact, only in the European Union and other rich area, Australia, New Zealand, in general, are journalists safer than in India. Yet, to justify the very negative safety score, because remember, on the survey, India is rated worse for safety than Afghanistan, according to India's own journalists answering the survey. Well, how do you justify that? Well, you look for something to justify it, and what you find is you find some numbers about journalist deaths, and then you use the statistics meaninglessly. It's a circular reasoning sort of argument. Instead of saying our survey showed that journalists were not safe, but in fact the data suggests the opposite, which I think is what RSF, what a responsible organization should be doing. They're just looking to justify what their survey has said. And they're playing with data that simply don't support their narrative.
Jay, I would like to bring you back in here that do you really think that the people who are doing this survey, the Reporters Beyond Borders and things like that they actually are so ignorant of ground realities around the world that they would that they would release a survey like that? Because, as I said, at the end of the day, this is about the credibility of these surveys, and because it has real world impact to whatever degree. So do you think that this is absolutely out of ignorance, or that there is a deliberate attempt there, or maybe not deliberate, but you are picking up people to give responses which suit your narrative? Is that happening, or they're genuinely ignorant and absolutely innocent when it comes to this, and it's only a problem with the methodology and the people who are being selected?
Pallavi, unfortunately, none of the things which you have just proposed is true. They also understand what they are publishing is rubbish, but they can't do anything about it. See, the West has created a system of process and policies and procedures, and they have entangled themselves within those by doing so. So even though the people who are at RSF, they understand that it doesn't seem to be all right that Afghanistan or Hong Kong or all other places, countries are above India in this press freedom index, but they can't do much about it, because the minute they try to intervene in the system, they will be accused of doing it manually rather than through the system. So because they have established a system, now they have to live with it. Even people who are very much opposed to, this time around at least, very much opposed to Indian dispensation of Narendra Modi or BJP, they are openly writing on Twitter that this will kind of demonize them or take the credibility of these index to zero. And a person like Dr. Ashok Swan, if he says that I'm unable to defend what they have just put forward, so you can understand that it's just entanglement of whatever policy procedure system they have created. Now they are a victim of that system. Unless, as I have said, in Australia, when they talk about Australia, there is an established system here. Melbourne Press Club and Press Council of Australia and the Press Club, National Press Club, all three bodies are included and the reps are talked about. But the same system, because they call India as a third world country, which whose institutions cannot be trusted. This is very important, that the press club in India cannot be trusted, press council in India cannot be trusted. However, the handpicked partners of RSF can be trusted. These partners are in northeastern part of India. They are in Orissa. They can be in Mumbai. They can be in Delhi. NGOs. They, as Professor has just said, anybody who is writing can claim to be a journalist, which is okay from me. But there has to be a system to identify who is telling you why, which is missing. So now we don't care about these index. When I was really young, I used to study about them and used to go deep. And now experts like Professor Salvatore have told us that don't look the face value, because we have never gone on the backside of the surveys, what happens behind the scene. Now, once we have started looking at that, these things have no meaning, I suppose.
Uh, Professor Salvatore, we'll get your final comments on the index. Do you see that there's a pattern here with index after index kind of demonizing India or bringing down the rankings? I mean, you have made this point that sometimes maybe it may seem malicious, but basically it's a problem methodology. But overall, what do you make of it? I mean, we've had even journalists like Fareed Zakaria who recently mentioned that India seems bullish. People are optimistic. I mean, you have visited India a few times now. I am currently in India, so one can really, you just have to visit India to see what's happening. And of course, there are challenges. I mean, no one's claiming that things are perfect, but do you see a pattern here with all these reports that are coming out, which are like really bringing down India's rankings one after the other, when the ground reality is, of course, it depends on person to person, but ground reality seems different from that.
Look, I recognize as a social scientist that I can't tell the ground reality from having made a couple short visits to India as a English speaker who doesn't speak any regional languages and who doesn't live in the country. So I can't comment on how the ground reality is different from what these report. I'm just interested in the inconsistencies in the statistics themselves. That is, India's reality as measured on social surveys, when we ask people if they're free in India, does not correspond at all to the picture we get from these expert surveys, whether it's the democracy surveys or the Press Freedom Index. And not only does it not correspond, But those surveys that use in-country respondents, those ones we would hope would be the most accurate, are the ones that give the lowest scores to India. And that's why I keep coming back to this now notorious phrase, quote unquote, India's intellectuals are anti-India. That's not an aspersion I'm casting on individuals who I'm sure love their country and I'm sure are patriotic. Who am I as an outsider to tell people whether or not they love their country? I'm sure they want reform and they want improvements for their country. But I keep coming back to this fact that the people who are maligning India on these surveys, all of the circumstantial evidence points to the idea that it's actually India's own intellectuals, it's their own journalists, their own university professors who are complaining to outside Western organizations about how terrible India is, when in fact none of the data we have about India support that point of view.
Jay, your last thoughts.
I mean, I'll second Professor on that, that unless and until people start taking pride in their own country, pride in their own system, and work. I mean, it's not perfect. I know this for last 45 years that it's not perfect, but start working towards correcting whatever they can in their generation, and next generation will do so, as happens in Australia. Australia is not perfect. 20 years back when I came to Australia, it was worse than what it is today. So we are working to make it better. That's what the system is designed to do. However, right now, Indian intellectual academia or NGOs, they all are designed to curse whatever is happening there. Not because bad things are happening, just because there is somebody of their disliking at the helm of things. This is the only factor which is there, which results in such kind of indexes or such kind of rankings. Pallavi?
I will just put my final thoughts on this, that uh, as not just as a journalist but just as a person, uh, these indexes cause, I feel that they cannot be taken lightly, and that this question mark is there, whether it's just a question of methodology or there is some malicious intent, or even if it's not a malicious intent, there is a kind of a groupism, that you pick the people who support your narrative, and then you just generalize some people's opinion as what is happening on the ground, because again, at the end of the day, this is not based on hard data. This is based on respondents, unlike the graph that Dr. Salvatore put up, where he's clearly showing the risk factor and the safety factors, in terms of real data that's coming in numbers. So at the end of the day, it is very disappointing, because as you have mentioned, and even when we were growing up, I mean, we took these indexes seriously, and it's very disappointing to see this kind of a narrative being weaved. I mean, yes, a little bit of difference, some difference of opinion is obviously going to be there, but let's see going forward, if indeed it's only a question of methodology. Let's hope that these organizations improve on their methodology, and make questionnaires which are based on real position on the ground and common sense. Thank you so much, Dr. Salvatore Babones. Always lovely to speak with you. And thank you, Jeb Bharadwaj, for your time as well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching.